chosen few people who understood its potential, as well as just how much of an advantage you could get over your competitors by not just having a website, but also a strategy to capitalize and monetize upon it. Think how well you also might have done by registering DIY.com or insurance.com as a further example, because you recognized that people would soon move away from using the yellow pages to internet searches. Well, that's essentially the case what's going on right now with voice, because how we interact with technology will shift in a major way, and voice will be how we do it. But, and here's the big but, it's a whole different playing field than, for example, registering a domain name and being clever with choosing your SEO keywords. However, if having an open mind is one of your skills, then you'll have little trouble getting on board with and understanding what it all involves. And with the help of my guest today, you'll also be able to set about developing a strategy for voice too. Joining me on the 414 this week is Kane Simms, one of the UK's leading authorities in voice technology and host of the VUX World podcast, consultancy and design studio. Kane will bring you fully up to speed on what's involved with voice technology, deep dive into what it can do, and what you can do with it. The ultimate goal will be to give you everything you need so that you can investigate and decide upon a strategy of how you and your company can use and implement voice. You'll get a lot of value from this episode, and it's one that you'll be very glad you didn't miss. Good morning. My name is James Rostance, and this is the 414 live here on LinkedIn Live each and every Thursday. So, if this is the first time you've joined us, welcome along. The 414 is produced exclusively for you as a professional B2B marketer, whether you're in-house at a company or agency side. And equally, if you're an SME business owner who takes a solid interest in your company's sales and marketing activities. So, something big is on the way, and it's in the form of voice and voice technology. A lot of you will already have maybe used Amazon Alexa here, there, and everywhere, and we've all got Siri on our mobile phones. But the interesting thing about voice is that the proliferation of gadgets and devices that we all have available is already very high. The thing is that people are just not using voice technology fully yet. It's not mainstream yet, but it will very soon kick in so that we all start using and interacting with voice to control gadgets and control devices. And when that happens, that shift will happen very quickly. So the purpose of today's show is so that you, as a professional marketer, can set about developing a strategy now and then implementing it, so when that change does come, you will already be ahead of the game. So, voice is very much the topic for today, and I thought it would be excellent to have very much a shining star in the voice world. Joining me live from the Garden of England, and to add a little bit of sophistication to the show, joining me from Royal Tunbridge Wells, please welcome Mr. Kane Simms.
Morning, James. How's things?
Good morning, Kane. Really good. Been looking forward to this episode because I'm looking forward to this big shift when it does happen. And I know people they've been saying it for a few years that, it's going to happen this year. No, it's going to happen this year. But would you agree that 2020 should be the year that we all suddenly start using voice an awful lot more?
It's interesting. If you look back at mobile, I did a talk at an event a while back, and I pulled up a load of slides. I went through the internet, and I pulled up a load of slides about what we were saying when the iPhone was released. And believe it or not, in 2007, everyone was saying that 2007 is the year of mobile. 2008, people were saying that 2008 is the year of mobile. 2009, the same thing. 2010, 11, 12, and 13, and people are still saying the same thing. That it's going to be the year of mobile. But what was happening throughout all of that time is that it already was the year of mobile if you were active on mobile. It was already the year of mobile for the likes of Instagram and WhatsApp and Facebook and all of those companies that were kind of born during that mobile boom. 2007 was the year for most of them. So the year of voice is the year that you actually wake up and decide to do something about it. I don't know whether it's going to be completely total worldwide mass adoption in whether it'll be 2021 or whatever, who knows. I think Bill Gates, we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term, but underestimate the impact and the pace of change in the long term. So it's happening and it's underway, but whether it's this year, next year, who knows when it'll actually be the point where people wake up and realize that actually this is going on and we need to do something about it.
Good. That was a solid answer. I like that. Goodness. So, we should start, I guess, by me asking you, how do you like to explain voice, and I put this in capital letters, how do you like to explain voice to people when first introducing them to the concept? How do you explain it?
So, most normal people don't know what voice is, and they don't use the term voice, but it's just like an industry term that we've picked up because it's short and it's easy to kind of describe. Most people, like my dad, for example, he just talks to his phone. He doesn't know what Google Assistant is, he doesn't know what voice is, he doesn't really care, he just talks to his phone. And so it's easier usually to explain to people that it's just like what we're doing is we're creating experiences for and establishing a presence for brands on the kind of interfaces or the kind of surfaces that people just talk to. And that's the basic definition of what voice is it's anything, software, devices, or any kind of computer type that you can talk to, and it understands you and can then either do something for you, like turn on your light or take out an insurance policy, or that was a bit of two random examples from light switching to insurance. But there is a German company that is doing that. Or it can respond to you in spoken language as well. So the most common examples that people will have is Siri on the iPhone, Alexa, the Echo smart speakers, Google Assistant on Android, and also the smart speakers. Those are examples of what we would call voice platforms. So in this definition platform, we're talking about something that has a base level of functionality or value, and that you can build on top of to increase the value that the platform has. So it's the same as, think of it as Windows or iOS. Yeah, so Windows has a base level of functionality. You can build applications on top of the Windows operating system to increase the functionality that the Windows operating system has in its entirety. Alexa is kind of like that. So Alexa comes with a base level of functionality, timers and calendar integrations and things like that, music. But then you can build on top of that with customized third-party bespoke applications, if you like. They call them skills in the Alexa world or actions in the Google world, that increase the functionality ability of the entire thing. So it breaks down into two things. One is the platform, and the other is an interface, so voice user interface, or VUI as it's often called. And that is anything that it might not have a platform, or it might not have a voice assistant in there, but it might just be something that you can talk to and make something happen. So for example, you to say to your coffee machine, make me a coffee, and it will just perform the action making you a coffee. And so voice breaks down into those two areas: platforms and assistants, and interfaces. And the interface can be an interface to any kind of technology in any kind of hardware, or even an interface to the web.
Oh, what there? That was you cut off really quickly. Then I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. I was going to ask you a question. So Jonathan Kendrick has come in quite early on with cool. A question, and he asks actually, what devices are most used for voice search?
So at the moment, Microsoft did a study last year. It was called the Voice Assistant Report or something like that, Voice Report, I think it was called. And they found that the two most used assistants are Google Assistant and Siri, closely followed by Amazon Alexa. So 36% each between Google Assistant and was the top voice assistant, and then Alexa was like 20% in terms of its usage. So what that shows us is that Alexa is by far and away the market as far as smart speaker sales are concerned. So Alexa has almost a 70% market share. It's been decreasing over the last 3 years because Google has kind of been gathering pace. But so Amazon and the Echoes have nearly a 70% share of the smart speaker market, yet they are the second most used voice assistant. So what that tells us is that the usage is coming from mobile. So most Google Assistant has 500 million active monthly users. I don't know what the stats are for Apple because they're like a little black box, but most people are using Google Assistant on their mobile. Most people are using Amazon Alexa on the smart speakers, and most people are using Siri on mobile as well. So the most common device typically for voice search is mobile.
Nice. At the moment, hey.
At the moment, yeah. It's interesting because what will end up happening is that so Rand Fishkin, I'm sure some people that are listening will be familiar with Rand Fishkin. He founded Moz, which was a search consultancy that ended up turning into a tool provider, and now it's like one of the big search engine tool providers. He created a video in like 2016 that said that search in general is rising. So typed search, traditional search, if you like, is rising. Search is rising at the same time, but voice search isn't overtaking or overlapping typed search. And we had Dr. Pete from Moz on our podcast, VUX World podcast, last year as well, and he was saying the same thing. He was saying that voice searches are happening in times and in environments where we don't have access to our hands, like when we're cooking, or we don't have access to our phone, like when we're driving. But what I did the other week was we were watching Benidorm. For anyone who is in Britain who knows about Benidorm, the series. I wanted to know, the series, yeah. So we were watching Benidorm, right? And I wanted to know when it first aired. And I had my phone in my hand, but I asked Alexa. And so what that led me to think about was how many other people are in a position where they could search normally, as they would do through Google or whichever search engine they use, but they're not, they're using a smart speaker instead. And so for that search there, the smart speaker stole a search away from mobile in my instance. And so what we'll see is over time, we'll see voice searches through your likes of things like smart speakers start to kind of edge and eat into the searches that are being made on mobile and other surfaces. Because even if I'm typing and I'm in the middle of doing some work on a laptop or whatever, I have a smart speaker here, it's easier for me just to say a search term and question than it is for me to leave what I'm doing on the machine and go and fire a browser or another tab and then perform a search there. So right now, the most common device for searches is mobile, yes. But over time, if the smart speaker sales carry on going as they've been going for the last 4 years, the voice searches will start eating away into the mobile searches, and they'll start the smart speaker voice assistant devices, whichever they are, smart displays as well, will start taking up a little bit of that traffic, I think.
And I can see this is very much where maybe in 10 years time we'll look back and go, you used a keyboard? What? You mad? I'm pretty sure they referenced something like that in one of the early Star Trek movies.
Yeah, quite possibly, yeah.
I'm not going to embarrass myself and rack my brains out for the next 5 minutes trying to figure out which scene it was. But yes, in a few years' time, we'll probably think we're crazy for using keyboards. So what principles are you keen for people to understand then when it comes to voice?
Mm-hmm. So there's a few, and it depends on, so we've kind of so far been talking a little bit mostly about kind of search. And with search specifically, the key principle is to, the kind of the pyramid, the inverted pyramid style of writing. I don't know if you come across it. It's a journalistic style of writing where you start with the conclusion and then you work back through the details. So typically if someone writes a document, they will start with an opening background section, then they'll work through some of the findings, and then they'll wrap up with the conclusion. What journalists do and what newspapers do and what kind of good writers online do is that they understand that people only read 20% of a web page. And so they create content that starts with the main point, starts with the meat, and then works back through the details. So for voice search, that kind of principle that you need to start applying to your websites is that you need to start at the end when you're writing something, because with voice assistants, because audio is linear, it's every single word you use takes up time in someone's day, and no one wants to sit there and listen to 5 minutes worth of content when they can hear the same thing in 10 seconds. And so one of the principles is, from a voice search perspective, is to start kind of like front loading your web content and start writing with the end first. The second thing is that voice assistants and voice platforms, if we start talking about the platforms now, like Alexa and Google Assistant, if you were to build an application for those platforms, is that they are audio platforms. And this is something that people, most of the time, is that what you're doing is you are creating audible experience and a conversational experience. And those two things have specific nuances about them. So people can faster than they can type. I think we can speak something like 300 words a minute. Typists can type 120 words a minute. And so voice is very good at receiving an input, but in terms of its output, with audio medium and every second counts, it's not always fantastic at what it communicates back. So you need to be thinking about how can you communicate things audibly in the best way possible. And this is when we start getting into things like sonic branding and audio branding, sound design, and the use of things like earcons, which are kind of like audible versions of what you might know as an icon, for example. So instead of saying something like, if someone wants to order something and says instead of saying that was successful, thank you very much, you might just have the sound of success, or whatever that sounds like. And so some of the things that brands struggle with is trying to think about what does their brand actually sound like, because many brands and companies have never really had to think about that before. But most voice assistants, smart displays aside, which I think will be increasingly more adopted as we kind of move on, but right now it's an audio platform. And so how your brand sounds is important, the personality of your presence on there. So do you want to just take Alexa's voice, for example, or do you want a customized voice? The kind of soundscapes that you use should be reflective of the essence and personality of your brand. And also, with it being conversational, people have high expectations of a conversation. When me and you are talking, we have fairly, the fidelity of human conversation is actually pretty high. And so it's trying to take some of the essence that's within a conversation and translating that into the voice experience, so it feels natural and it sounds natural and it's easier and more comfortable to interact with. So those are kind of the main things from a platform perspective: is consider how it sounds, consider your personality, and consider the dialogue and the way that you communicate.
With you. Could you add a bit more to, there's a description I'd not heard before there, where you'd mentioned the audio equivalent of icons. What was that term again? Could you just flesh it out again?
Yeah. So it's earcon. So in sonic branding, there is a number of different elements that are used that kind of make up the palette, if you like. An audio branding or sonic branding agency will work with a company to create a mnemonic. And a mnemonic is essentially a soundtrack. It's just like a piece of music that is a representation of a brand. Okay. Once they've got the mnemonic, they then chop the mnemonic up into lots of little bite-sized kind of assets you can use for like the beginning of a video, the end of a video, the opening sequence to a voice experience. There's the mnemonic that gets used in lots of different ways. Then there is sonic logo, which is the kind of audio version of your physical logo. So if you think about McDonald's, the kind of what's the McDonald's one? The whistle.
Yeah.
That one, yeah. Intel were pretty ahead of the game with the ding, 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 ding. You know the one?
Yeah.
And so that's a sonic logo. Okay, so that's another part of the sonic branding arsenal, if you like, is the sonic logo. The next thing is earcons. So this is what we were talking about in terms of the audio equivalent of an icon. So in, say, like web design, you will have, like on a mobile website, you might have that hamburger menu, the little icon with three stripes, and that's an icon that shows that this is a menu. So in audio, in the voice assistant sort of landscape, you want to have the same kind of thing, but audible. So for example, if you want to add something into your basket, you would create the sound of something being added to your basket. If you want to show somebody that their payment's been successful, then how can you use just a little audio sample, like not necessarily a cha-ching or something like that, but like a little audio sample that signifies what's happening. And things like, if you're doing, one of the techniques is if you've got like a how-to or a step-by-step kind of tutorial or something like that, then with every tip or every step of the tutorial, there'll be a little kind of audio icon, a symbol, to let you know that things have moved on. So it might start with a low pitch, like a bung, and then the next tip might be a bung, and the next tip is a bung. And so it's just little signals that help the user figure out what's going on, because it's an audible interface, so that it helps the users understand what the system is doing. And it also helps the users understand where they are within the experience. And then the final thing is soundscapes. So if you are creating something for, like, let's say you're a post office and you want to have a voice experience, then what does the sound of a post office sound like? And do you want the audible experience on the voice to be reflective of the physical experience that you would experience in real life? And you might use that by putting a soundscape in the background that sounds a little bit like a post office sorting room or something like that. So those basics of kind of sonic branding, essentially.
What then, as a follow-on from that, what would be the key mistakes that you'd be wanting people to avoid in developing their voice strategy?
In terms of the strategy overall, what tends to happen is that people have an idea and then jump to a solution based on one idea. So they will think, well, Alexa's really popular, we need to build a skill for Alexa. So they'll go from understanding that they want to do something with voice straight to a solution with missing the middle part out, and I'll get to the middle part in a sec. And once they jump to that point, they will then immediately jump to a use case. So it's voice is important, we need to do something with voice. Alexa's the thing that everyone talks about when they talk about voice, we need an Alexa skill. And then they'll say, right, we need an Alexa skill, so let's build something like this. And they'll have an idea, and then they'll just go and run with that and build it. So quite often, people are not approaching it from a strategic perspective, having a voice strategy. They're approaching it from a kind of Me Too perspective, like we need an Alexa skill. In the same way as people thought the same about Facebook. You know, when Facebook started to become really important, started to capture a lot of attention, everyone was rushing around thinking we need a Facebook page. Same thing happened with websites. You know, the internet starts getting really popular. People are starting to transact online. Everybody all of a sudden wants a website. And they don't know what they want the website to do. They don't know what the website needs to do. They don't know what their users need their website for and what value they can bring. They just want a website. And that's kind of where we're at a little bit in some cases when it comes to voice. People are jumping straight onto Alexa with the first use case they can think of and running with that, and then maybe being a little bit unhappy when it doesn't work out exactly how they might have wanted to.
It sounds like the classic thing that Seth Godin described in one of his books, the Meatball Sunday.
Yeah.
Where they're just piling on. Okay, so... Yeah. So those are mistakes to avoid. What would you say are the latest developments which you'd be keen for people to be aware of and get ready for with voice?
One of the big things is that voice over time will become the interface to most things. You know, we are born being able to hear the sound of our mother's voice and recognize the sound of our mother's voice. So language is essentially hardwired into our brain, and it's easier, even when we think in language. It's very difficult to have a thought without first translating that into language that you say to yourself in your head. It's the voice in your head. And so we're hardwired for language, and 9 times out of 10, it's easier and it requires less thought and is more, I don't want to say natural because our hands are also natural, but it is simply less friction to use our voice to ask something to do something for us. And with that, I think what we're going to see is voice interfaces popping up absolutely everywhere. And it's going, I think one of the things that's happening that is going to be interesting is essentially voice enabling the web. Look at Mozilla. They released a extension for the Firefox browser last week, I think it was, which is essentially it's a voice interface for Firefox. So once you've installed this, let's try it out yet, but once you've installed this plugin, from what I've been reading about it, is that you can then just speak to your browser and navigate through websites. There are other companies like Voices who are doing the same thing. They've got a platform whereby, for example, if you're a retailer, you can index your catalog through Voices, and then the search bar on the website has a little microphone. You click the microphone, you can just speak a search term like, you know, find me a pair of white Nike Air Max trainers in a size 8 for less than £100, and it will just run that query and pull back the results. Algolia are doing the same kind of thing. So we're seeing voice starting to come into the web. And if you look at what Google announced probably 2 weeks ago, in Google Chrome, the voice search option in Google Chrome, which is there. If you go open Chrome, go to google.com, and the search bar has a little microphone next to it. Typically what that microphone did was you press it, you would speak, and it would translate your speech into text in the search bar, and it would perform a normal Google search. Google are replacing that voice search functionality in Google Chrome with Google Assistant, which is, I cannot explain what a big deal that is. I can't find the words to explain what a big deal that is, because what's the next step after that? So just to explain what that actually means is that now, or when they launch it, when you're using Google Chrome, you won't anymore see the 10 blue on the search engine results page. You will see the response that you will get if you ask Google Assistant the same question on your smart speaker or in the Google Assistant app. So what that means is essentially you're going to get one result. So Google have changed their whole mission for existing. The whole reason for existing used to be to organize the world's information. That's now changed. Last year at I/O, they changed their whole mission to helping you get jobs. And what helps people get jobs done? Serving them 10 blue on a search results page and letting them figure it out for themselves, or using the intelligence to just give you the thing that you've asked for. So that's the start. That's the kind of thing they're moving towards. So the voice searches on Google Chrome will turn into a Google Assistant served result. But the next step beyond that is to extend that functionality into the typed search box. And I put a video on LinkedIn probably about 3 weeks ago when I heard this news. The first thing I was thinking is Google Assistant will replace Google Search. And what you type into the search bar, instead of getting the 10 blue links, you will get the same response as you would get if you ask Google Assistant the question. And the way in which they're gearing up for that is they've released speakable markup in America. It's in beta right now. So essentially you can mark up bits of your website for spoken phrases. So using this speakable markup, you would say to essentially, you're telling Google Assistant, read this bit and read that bit. That's the bits that we want you to read out loud when someone asks for it. They've also got other support for schema markup like how-tos and FAQs. So if you've got an FAQ page site, you can use this schema markup to mark up the page behind the scenes. It's a bit of JavaScript to mark it up for voice search. So when you ask Google Assistant a question, it will draw the answer from that markup and read it through Google Assistant. So over time, when they eventually, which I think will happen, replace the search with Google Assistant, it'll be the websites that have this markup in that will end up being in a better position. But then beyond that, take a step back and you think that all of the actions that are built on Google Assistant, the third-party apps, if you like, that you can build on top of Google Assistant, they are created for conversational experiences. They are conversational experiences. And so over time, a Google search will end up potentially, let's say, for example, you search Google for trains to London. If the train line have an action and it works really well on the smart speaker and people are using it and it's fulfilling the need, there's nothing stopping them necessarily in the future from bringing that action across and serving that action on the search engine results page via Google Assistant instead of actually sending you to the 10 blue links. And if that action can do things like actually book the train and use the credit card details that you have stored in your Google account, and then the whole transaction can take place on a search engine results page, which, yeah. So those brands that are now thinking about it's absolutely huge. It's absolutely, essentially, if they flip that button tomorrow, all of these actions, everyone will be forced to make an action. Essentially, you'll have to make an action because that's a conversational experience. There'll be no such thing as search refinements. They won't exist. The search will be a conversation. The first search term will be the start of a conversation, and it is absolutely massive. It changes everything, basically.
Yeah, it does indeed sound almost like a more brutal version of when search engine rankings first came in. Anyone who wasn't on the first page, you're done for. But now it's really just going to be down to the first one.
Result zero is what they call it in voice. It's result zero. It's the thing that gets the answer. That's what it's all about, you know. And for Google, you know, ultimately they'll find a way to monetize it. They'll find a way to kind of incorporate ads and stuff like that. But ultimately, if Google's real aim is to help people get jobs done, then what better way of doing that than giving someone exactly what they've asked for when they ask for it and let them complete a transaction if it's transactional, or give them the info they need straight up front. That's in line with Google's mission. And a lot of people that won't like that, there'll be a lot of people probably listen to this now think that'll never happen and Google would never do that. But ultimately, that's what Google's strategy is to give people exactly what they need when they need it. And Google Assistant is there to do exactly that.
Dear God. There's another film reference. I know, mind blown, right? Film that springs to mind at this point is The Hunger Games. This is the last player v player. Wow.
Yeah.
You know what? Now would be a good time. Questions on the way. The next thing I think would be good to ask is the big one, which is how on earth do marketers set about developing a strategy for voice?
So it's I'll start with a typical political answer, which will be it depends on what you do, what you sell, and who you sell to. But ultimately, the aim of putting together a voice strategy is fairly similar to any other strategy. So we want to figure out what the business does, what your aims and goals are, and what does success look like for that business. What are you doing? Marketing activity are you doing currently? What's working and what's not? As well, the business side is trying to understand exactly what the business is trying to achieve. The second thing is figuring out who your users are, where your users, what they care about, what their current experience is of your product and service. Do user research to try and figure this stuff out. And then we also try and figure out, learn how are your customers using voice assistants, conversational interfaces and things like that. And then we try and marry those kind of the needs that your users have, or the areas where they need more support, the areas where we're not doing so well, marry that together with the aims of the business and try and find where that overlap is. And there's a few exercises that we do to find that overlap. One is that we do kind of like a day in the life of kind of scenario where once we've got some user personas, some real customer personas, we'll go through a day in the life of one of those people or a segment of those people. And then we're trying to find the times in the day where they either have the problem that your product or service can fix or have a thought about needing that thing, and try and figure out all the times and points in the day where you have opportunity to interact with them. And then we try and figure out from there what kind of interaction makes sense. Does it make sense if this interaction is over Alexa? Does it make sense if this interaction would be like a Siri? Would it make sense if this actually came from the website? Would it make sense if they're already on the website for us to do something with a voice interface on the website? And so we are thinking about all of these different ways and reviewing all of your current customer touch points and any potential new customer touch points that would add that you'd be able to use voice within, essentially. So that's kind of like the first step. Then the aim, really, of any voice strategy in this day and age is to start with a crawl and then walk, run. So what we want to try and get to fairly quickly is what is it we can do in the next 3 months to start learning a little bit about how our users interact with us in conversational channels. What are the use cases that we can use to try and prototype and try and test? We do things like role play to try and see whether we can figure the style of the conversation and the kind of use case validation. And then we'll run some prototyping, essentially. Try and figure out which ones stick. And then over the course of this whole kind of process, we're building out essentially a backlog of opportunities and use cases across all voice channels. But the most important thing is to just find one thing that you can start and one thing you can get your teeth into. It might be an Alexa skill, it might be optimizing your website, it might be building the Google Assistant action, it might be adding a voice interface to your website or to a search bar on your website, or it might be putting it into your app or into your phone lines or anything like that. It's finding that place to start, because ultimately voice will have opportunities, I think, for any business, either internally in terms of your operations internally and your service internally or externally in terms of how you reach and engage customers. I think business will have an opportunity. And so the point of going through this process of identifying your users and their needs and their expectations and trying to marry that with the business is that you're not wasting time, and you're not kind of for the sake of it. You're doing it with something that is tied to the business, and you're doing it that is something that is rooted in the needs of your users. The other things to consider when putting together your voice strategy, which we've kind of covered and touched on, is what does it sound like? What does your brand actually sound like? What is the tone and personality of your kind of brand in these conversational channels? So some companies have a half decent place to start. So for example, Domino's created a bot called Dom that already existed. It was a Facebook bot, and they give it a persona. They called it Dom, and then they used that in their Alexa skill, and now that's their conversational agent. It's called Dom. Other brands are going to have a little bit of trouble. So if, let's say, for example, if you are a car manufacturer, and the voice of your adverts has been a voice actor that's a famous actor from such and such a series, and now you need to create a conversational experience, you kind of want that to be integrated with all of the rest of your audio assets. This thing is going to have a life, and it's going to exist for many years, and it might get pretty expensive. And so you need to kind of figure out, what does your brand sound like, and go through that kind of branding, audio brand process. And so there's lots of places to start. You can start with, what conversations are you already having with your customers right now? You know, what kind of conversations are you having over the phone with them? What kind of emails are you receiving? What kind of queries come through the website? What kind of web pages are viewed? What's the app kind of performance? And so you can start already look at what you currently do and where the demand is on your business, and start to see whether or not that kind of content can be repurposed and repurposed for voice. So there's 100 different ways of skinning the proverbial cat. It all depends on the type of business, the type of users, your current estate and your current channels that you use, your current systems that you have operating in the background. And it's just a case of figuring out where to start. Where is that first opportunity? Is it an integration with your line of business systems? Is it Alexa skill to try and test how people interact with your brand on voice channels? Is it your website where you've already got traffic? You know, it's kind of, it's one half dozen of the other, but there's always an opportunity. But the most important, somewhere to start, and somewhere relatively small and contained that you can quickly.
Okay, so what would be then your favourite current best use examples of voice well implemented to help illustrate that point?
Yeah, so there's a few good examples. One of the a good example that we've just finished building is for a startup called Natter, and they're essentially the Deliveroo for voice. So we're starting with one restaurant in London. You can open the Other Side Fried Alexa skill. It's a restaurant in London, and you can go through the process of ordering a takeaway. You can actually see the menu, order, pay for it there and then. The whole thing is a voice first interaction. So we're starting to see more things like that happen. Commerce being done via these voice channels. Another good example, I think it's Interflora. I think it is. It's a flower company. Vocalo, another agency in London, have just released an Alexa skill for those, where you can buy and order flowers through Alexa. There's a really good example in Germany. I will butcher the name if I try and pronounce it, but it's an insurance company in Germany, and you can actually take out an insurance premium on Alexa. A good example, which was working really well, and I'm not sure what the situation with it now, but they released it actually probably a year and a half ago, was Virgin Trains being able to book a train ticket on Alexa, which is a really good use case. There's also good use cases around, so the most things that people use smart speakers for is music, questions, things like news. So the BBC are doing some really good stuff when it comes to news. Their skill, it will give you like a lead into the story, and then it'll be up to you whether you want to hear more. And if you do hear more, it'll then ask you whether you want a different type of story or what kind of topics you're interested in. And it's almost like interactive news, which is really good. And they've then since gone forward, and now they're building their own assistant now, essentially. So music, news, question and answers is pretty good. A good example from a question and answer standpoint was last year, a guy called John Campbell, who's got an agency called Rabbit and Pork in London. He asked Google Assistant what the house prices are in Coventry, what the average house price is in Coventry. Google Assistant couldn't answer him. So he built an action that answered the house prices for the whole country. And what happened is when you ask Google Assistant that question, rather than not being able to answer it, it was throwing you into his action. And so that's a good example. The use case is a bit kind of like niche, but it's a good example of the kind of practice that you can do where if you have an action, you find an opportunity to build an action that has demand for it. Google, rather than reading you the search result, will actually put people into action. So there's some opportunities to explore there. There's some good examples happening of voice in the enterprise. So there's a company called Uma based in Halifax, and they have got the Uma is a digital assistant essentially, and it's a meeting room assistant. So what it will do is it kind of appears in conversational channels like Slack and Microsoft Teams and stuff like that, but it can also run via Alexa and Google Assistant, where you can just ask to book a meeting room and it will book you out a meeting room. It'll take meeting notes for you, circulate actions afterwards. It's absolutely phenomenal. So there's a whole load of stuff, and then there's a lot of stuff happening in the kind of games category as well, children's games and general interactive. So there's a company called Earplay who've made, and another one called Xandra, who have some fantastic interactive stories for Dunkirk and for HBO's Westworld and for Jurassic World. So it's full on kind of like interactive audio dramas on Alexa and Google Assistant, which is fantastic. And then there's companies like Matchbox, another one in London called LabWorks, and they create some really engaging games like Would You Rather and things like that. So yeah, it's really good. So these are kind of the use cases at the moment that are falling into kind of music and audio, interactive audio, kind of commerce and conversational transactions, and then leisure and games is the what we're seeing a lot more of at the moment.
Goodness. Well, what would in that case, what would you like to have people and our viewers and listeners have as core takeaways from all of this, for them to move forward, to do better in what they do, and to ultimately deliver some solid results for their company? What would the key takeaways be?
Key takeaways would be to, when you consider voice, think about voice beyond Alexa, and think about every single touch point that you have with a user or a customer. Think about what would a conversation look like at those points. And that's the very beginnings of trying to think about how a conversation would be with your users, the very beginnings of trying to figure out what those uses might be. Definitely consider the personality and the kind of audible presence of your brand. Try and figure out and get to the bottom of what is it that we sound like? What's our personality? What's the tone of the language that we use? What kind of language do we use? And how does that all kind of fit together? And that's the main things really. Open your mind beyond Alexa. Think about how your kind of brand personality is and how that's coming across. And just start small. Start with something manageable, start with something, even if it's an internal prototype to prove a concept. But the main takeaway I would think is that voice is not gonna go anywhere. And if anything, it's like going back to that Bill Gates line where, we overestimate the pace of change in the short term, but underestimate it in the term. And the best thing that you can do now is read up, kind of try and understand it, try and do some experimentation, try and figure out where are the use cases that you might be able to target. Start small, start with some prototypes, start with some testing, put together a roadmap, and then just iterate your way along. Start crawling, start walking, and then start running.
I feel like we've really gone through it today, and I can't thank you enough for going into the detail and also just how important this is all going to turn out to be, especially what you're saying about how Google Assistant, isn't that? That's the right term. Google Assistant is now going to be taken over, and just giving you the first results that it thinks is the best. And unless you argue otherwise, that's one who's going to be winning. Wow.
Yeah, but beyond that as well, it's that if you have an action. So if Google has a choice, right, of giving you, so that what you said is true. So definitely it's going to go down to the one result because that's the only thing that we can handle audibly, and it's Google's job to help you get jobs done. But if Google has a choice between giving you a web result or giving you an action is a bespoke, built, conversational experience that can deliver on a user need, then what's it going to do? Is it going to carry, it will still carry on trying to backwards engineer the web into Google Assistant. But if you have an action that's already built on the platform, that is a voice first action that is there to have that conversation and carry the transaction, over time, Google will start putting people into the actions rather than serving them web content, because web content you can just read, whereas the action you can actually get stuff done.
Whoa, just the last second then. So you've just pulled something even more massive out of the bag right there. Yeah, I'm just putting it into a thought process now. So, what we were talking about, I guess, right at the beginning, was that it is different to the way that web search came, or the internet came in first of all when search engines were. It's it's similar, but it's still different. So
it's like imagine pulling your phone out, Googling train times from London Bridge to Edinburgh for next Thursday, and then Google takes you away from the search page and takes you into your app, and the app is already pre-populated with what you've just said. That's essentially what is happening. In fact, that's called an in-app action. Google Assistant can do that right now. You can start a transaction on Google Assistant. It'll fire up an app and pre-populate the app with what you've just said. But for people's mental model to try and figure out what this means is, when you put a search term in, it'll be like searching something on Google and then bringing the functionality from your app into the results page so that you can deliver on a transaction. That's essentially what an action is.
Yes. So by the sounds of it then, what's going to really win the day at the end of the day is people and companies who really focus on developing the best way possible to help guide the person through what they want. Not necessarily the end result, but guide them through what they want, which is similar but different then, in a way, to search engine results.
It'll depend on the frame of mind the user's in and what stage they're at in their kind of decision making, you know. So one of the things John Campbell found when he launched this house price thing was that, let's say, for example, if you're the company that provides house price information and someone searches on Google and you come up first, and what Google's been doing with its featured snippets is it's then bringing the result, the information that's on the page, into the search result. So if you say if you ask Google what's the average house price in Coventry, you might well have the result in the search results page. You'll be able to see the average house price of Coventry. For you then to find out the average house price of Manchester, you need to perform a search again, which might result in the search results changing. A different website might serve that result. So it's the same as if you say, I want a hotel in London, and then you revise the search and you say, I want a hotel in Kensington. The search results might be different. So the way of having an action is that if you can capture that first result, so what's the house prices in Coventry, go into the action. I need a hotel and go into the action. You then own the follow-up experience. So if no one goes back to the search pages and does another search again, they're inside your experience. So then you can do the prompting and you can do the kind of questioning to narrow down that search, as you've said, and then provide people with a result at the end of it. You almost take over the search refinements.
Yes. Good gosh. Okay. You know, I think it would be good at this time. It would be good at this point to give you your podcast actually a mention for people who are keen to deep dive even further into the rabbit hole of voice. Tell us about that briefly.
Yeah. So if you enjoy this depth of conversation about this particular topic, then our podcast, VUX World, is all about that, essentially. We've been doing it for over 2 years now. In fact, our second anniversary was yesterday, and I didn't even realize. I've only just realized that this morning. But we've got bags of episodes there, and we bring in industry experts and thought leaders to pick their brains on how they do what they do to help you do what you do better. So we've got things on dialogue design, things on search, things on audio branding, things on the technical development of it all, things on strategy. We've got case studies. We've got every corner of voice we've probably covered and continue to cover every Monday. So if you want to learn a bit more, then VUX World is the podcast, which you can find on any podcast player, or the website is vux.world if you want to go and listen on.
Nice one. Happy birthday. Happy second birthday. That's a
Yeah,
cool thing.
yeah.
Hey, here you go. You know, I said to you just before we went on air, I'd been digging around my brain for some geek-related kind of factoids.
Yes,
and
yes.
I do have a cool one relating to voice. Right. Now, let me cue things up here. This is a bit like being back on the radio. Right, I need to get rid of the music bed that's playing for the audience. Right. So, do you remember... here we go. Oh, now tell me if you can actually hear this. This track. Can you hear that?
No, I can't hear that.
All right, we're playing "Snap the Power."
Right.
One of the best songs of 1990 by far. All right. Now, you know the bit at the beginning with the talking, and I'll play this now, where it says. He goes, America for transceptor technology, principal Vojska, computer of personnel is Sputnik. Right.
Okay.
Right. So that bit, I always thought they were talking about, you know, the first Russian satellite, Sputnik. But turns out that Sputnik actually just means assistant. Right.
Interesting.
And the actual translation of this is the American computer company Transceptor Technologies has started production of the personal companion computer. And this is when I started digging into it a bit. And it turns out that released in 1990, it was controlled by voice, this computer, and it could, amongst other functions, automatically download articles from USA Today with a built-in modem for people with who are visually impaired.
Wow.
So there we go. And
yeah.
To tie that in nicely to your birthday, that track was actually released. Wow, right, it was released in March 1990. So voice technology and voice commands has been around for, that's 30 years, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, even before that, I mean, there was examples in 87 and I think in 86 of the first computer that was able to actually speak. It was, I can't remember what it was called, but it was essentially a keyboard. Yeah. And they would press different buttons on the keyboard and it would have the computer generate different words and different speech. It could only say like 5 or 8 words. But that was the kind of origin of computers talking. And in fact, it might have even been before the 80s, to be honest. But the actual technology that exists in all of these systems has been in existence for quite a long time. A lot of it's been used in IVR systems for many years. The difference is that what's happened over the last kind of like probably 5 to 10 years is that the natural language processing element has gotten a hell of a lot better. And the kind of things like far-field microphone technology, automatic speech recognition, which kind of takes audio and breaks it down into actual text. All of this technology has just improved so much over the last 10 years to the point where they reckon now that the speech recognition around about 96% for most of the assistants, which means it recognizes and understands 96% of the things spoken to it. Which is like, that's at the level of human comprehension. Most of the time, the mistakes that happen is because, you know, it didn't hear you properly or there's background noise or whatever. But the actual core technology, it's existed for quite a while.
It's pretty nuts. But yes, and it's going to take over completely in the not too distant future.
It's takeover is a strong statement, but essentially what will happen is that everything will just become ambient. So it's this concept of ambient computing. So yes, you might have a smart speaker in every room, or it might not be speakers. It might be a smart lamp that just you can talk to and talks back or whatever. But it's just ambient computing. And that's what I think the future will be, is that you'll be able to do stuff. You'll be able to find out information. You'll be able to get stuff done. You'll be able to access content in the internet and serve wherever you are in any room because of this ambient technology. And it once voice recognition to a point where it's foolproof, and there's a company called Pindrop working on this kind of technology now, which is like, you know, when you phone up your bank and they'll recognize your voice print and then they'll start talking, they'll allow you to talk to them because they recognize your voice. Once we get to the point where that is totally foolproof, then there is nothing stopping something like Alexa from being kind of open, and it'll hook up to your account based on the sound of your voice, which means that if you've got Amazon Alexa speakers all over your workplace and all over your home and in your car and everywhere you go, anyone will be able to speak to it, and their voice is their identifier that will hook up to their account, if that makes sense. Because there's so much, everyone's voice is unique. There's a company called Canary Speech, and they can identify with 3 minutes of audio from your voice. They can identify Parkinson's disease, they can identify Alzheimer's, because there's something like 2,500 data points in your voice, which apparently, according to Canary Speech, is more DNA, which is absolutely unbelievable. So yeah, once it gets to a point where recognizing one person's voice from another gets totally foolproof, we can potentially move into a ambient computing world where this technology just exists, and when you talk to it, it'll recognize who you are and then be able to personalize that experience based on your activity.
Just wow.
That's well further ahead though. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about that right now.
Yes, we've got enough homework to be going on with.
Yeah.
There we go. Well, boom. And just like that, we dropped off air. Unfortunately, just as I was coming to wrapping up the show and saying thank you to Kane for joining us, the studio software just crashed and we fell off air instantly, leaving the live stream viewers wondering what on earth had gone on. So, sorry about that. I've just been finishing writing a technical report for the software manufacturers for them to hopefully fix that, so it doesn't happen again. But in the meantime, I really hope that you got a lot of value from today's show. Goodness knows we got a lot in there, and yeah, Kane really knows his stuff. I enjoyed it. I really hope you did too. And if you're not already subscribed, please do visit the414.net to subscribe to the show so that you can join us each and every week for insights and wisdom from some of the greatest and most interesting minds in B2B marketing. And by subscribing properly from the website, you will get the weekly email to make sure that you don't miss an episode, and also the opportunity to catch up with any previous episodes that for whatever reason you might happen to miss. There we go. Well, my name's James Rostance. Thank you very much for watching.